Okay, so we can appreciate something with regards to the experience here. Now, the stock market crash of 1929, which marked the beginning of the Great Depression, came directly from wild speculation which collapsed and brought the whole economy down. The bubble of prosperity that was built on the mini-industrial revolution, where new industries appeared around consumer goods, had burst. And on October 1st, 1929, a massive fall in the stock market occurred, which caused a run on the banks. So the boom of the mid-1920s based on housing and automobiles slowed, and despite the lack of demand, overproduction continued. So capitalism was in a crisis, and after the crash, the economy was stunned, barely moving. Historians see that it was the maldistribution of income that was a significant factor that contributed to the Great Depression. Many American businesses misrepresented their assets to obtain loans, and as a result, they were overburdened with debt. The prevailing thought in 1929 concerning economic depressions was that economic downturns are natural and simply must be allowed to run their course. Whereas before, downturns were related to overproduction, now underconsumption was caused by falling wages and rising unemployment. But by 1929, many Americans could no longer buy the products they needed and wanted. So it's very important to understand and appreciate that those responsible for the economy didn't know what had happened. They were baffled by it, and they had refused to recognize it. And again, no protections were built into the economy. Economic historian John Kenneth Galbraith argued that speculation led to the crisis due to the lack of business regulation, due to the unhealthy corporate and banking structures, to unsound foreign trade, and deliberate economic misinformation. There was a bad distribution of income, where the highest 5% of the population received about 1/3 of all personal income. I think this sounds familiar. Again, the cycles of change in history. But Herbert Hoover, not long before the crash, boasted that America was near to the final triumph over poverty. But all over America, haphazardly created neighborhoods of shacks were built on garbage dumps. They're going to be called Hoovervilles. Herbert Hoover and the Republican program did not reach out to the majority of the suffering poor. In fact, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation under the Hoover administration was designed to bail out his political patrons at the outset. And then, of course, Mexicans are going to be blamed for the Depression. So Herbert Hoover did nothing to alleviate the plight of the workers. Republicans were not interested in helping workers. They were interested in helping businesses. And there were millions of tons of food around, but it was not profitable to transport it, not profitable to sell it, so it rotted in the fields. There was warehouses full of clothing, but the people who could not afford it to keep warm, so the clothing was not distributed. People froze to death. And there was houses. There was a housing boom in the 1920s, but these houses stayed empty, and people lived in these shacks because they couldn't pay the rent. They had been evicted, and they now lived in these shacks, quickly formed as Hoovervilles, that were built on garbage dumps. So you had nice neighborhoods that were just rotting, nobody living in them, and then garbage dumps. Now, the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, of which I went to, houses Hoover's papers on Pacific Rim countries and Asiatic trade. It stands tall amidst the campus infrastructure. It is euphemistically referred to by students as Hoover's last erection. Let's visit a documentary that helps us appreciate Hoover's conservative approach to the inherent cyclical crisis in capitalism.
Millions of American workers lost their jobs. 1 out of every 4 workers was jobless. Only a handful of wealthy investors profited from the collapse of the stock market, like President John F. Kennedy's father, Joseph P. Kennedy, or brilliant investor and presidential advisor Bernard Baruch, who became legendary as the man who sold out before the crash. Performer and humorist Will Rogers probably put it best.
10 men in our country could buy the whole world, and 10 million can't buy enough to eat.
So the millions of less fortunate Americans faced a grim and uncertain future. Soup kitchens and bread lines became as commonplace as the flappers and speakeasies of the Roaring '20s. And Herbert Hoover's campaign promise of a chicken in every pot couldn't have been farther from the truth. America's towns and cities struggled in vain to help the thousands in need. The jobless became the homeless. Shanty towns, makeshift communities of shacks constructed from wooden crates, tar paper, and cardboard sprang up. Disillusioned citizens called them Hoovervilles after the president, and the newspapers they slept under, Hoover blankets. Others left the city to ride the rails, looking for work. Too poor to purchase train tickets, they hitched rides on freight cars, hoping they wouldn't be caught, hoping they'd find a job. Approximately 2 million men became hobos, wandering the countryside looking for work. Between 1929 and 1932, roughly 400,000 farms were foreclosed when farmers couldn't pay their mortgages and banks repossessed the property. Thousands of farm families became migrant workers, following crop harvests to eke out a living. Then, to make matters even worse, drought, coupled with the overproduction of crops in the Great Plains, turned the area from Texas to Oklahoma into a dust bowl. In 1934, strong winds blew tons of dust from the plains all the way to the East Coast. Dust even coated New York City and settled on ships 500 miles out to sea in the Atlantic Ocean. Unemployment and poverty hurt everyone, especially children. Many left school to work and help their families survive, and many more went hungry and malnourished. Diet-related illnesses like rickets and scoliosis became all too common. Once again, President Hoover tried to reassure the nation by saying, "Recovery is just around the corner." But it was not to be, and more Americans grew disenchanted with his policies and administration. Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon echoed the beliefs of most of Hoover's advisors, that the economy would recover on its own. Hoover thought the government must take some action, but feared making government too strong, and so he chose a conservative approach, calling together business, banking, and labor leaders and urging them to work together and avoid laying off workers or calling strikes. Then he authorized the expenditure of federal funds for large public works projects, like Boulder Dam, later renamed Hoover Dam, to create jobs and wages for thousands of workers. Hoover felt giving direct help to needy Americans would undermine their self-respect and looked to private charities to help the hungry. Instead, he approved more than $2 billion in emergency financing to businesses, hoping their renewed success would trickle down to the people who needed assistance. It didn't. Rather, unemployment rose even higher, and Americans were caught in a web of despair.
Okay, so that's why Americans think that they're Egyptian. They live on Denial River, and in this particular case, they want to find somebody to blame for their problems, and so Mexicans are going to be the first to be blamed. This ends session 8. We'll see you for next week. Thank you very much.